what will be in store for us and the wider community as the years go by is at the very best uncertain, but all of us, every single one of us here, will play a role in shaping that story, either by our actions or our inaction. As a teenager, I lusted over the stories of old, as I'm sure many of you did here, the adventures of a time long past, and I'd somewhat resigned myself to seeking out the very best of the hunting opportunities which remained. In fact, it was this mindset and thinking that led me to meet one of our speakers tonight, Dear van der Lange, who's flown out from South Africa to speak tonight. Much has changed over the last 100 years, and I looked upon the opportunities of the past with envy. As far as I was concerned, the golden days of hunting were long gone by the time I was born. However, as I got older, I realized just how defeatist that was. I realized that in spite of what may have been, right now, as we sit here tonight, is the greatest era in hunting's history. And I say this because never before will the actions we take in such a confined space of time define our future so drastically. It places an incredible burden on all of us, but gives unprecedented meaning to the purpose and legacy that we all leave. If you wanted to make a difference, now is the time to be living. What we do today as hunters matters. How we are perceived matters. Doing nothing and hiding from a shifting society is only an option if we are happy to disappear with the sands of time. Does anyone here know what's written on the side of a £2 coin? Around the edge. Feel free to shout out if you know. No one? Standing on the shoulders of giants. It's a quote from the 12th century, and it was repeated by Isaac Walton. Not Isaac Walton, he's a fisherman. Isaac Newton. It means we build on the progress of our forefathers. Yet within the hunting community, in many respects, we have allowed the foundations of ethics, conservation, sportsmanship, etiquette, to slide in the wake of over-commercialization. We as individuals are not the most important aspect of hunting. What hunting means is, and be in no doubt, we are not winning. As a community globally, we are losing our relevance in a society which has moved far faster than we have evolved. A society disconnected and removed from the land we inhabit. You don't have to cast your mind back all that far, and hunters were the heroes of every story. They were revered and championed in life, just as much as fiction. Hunters and naturalists were not distinguished from one another. They were one and the same. At some point, this diverged, and with it, a great loss in our deeper connection to the land. In the years which followed the 1890s, in the face of great odds and near certain demise of much of the big game in North America, it was hunters who were at the forefront of a drive to save what was left. Humans had wiped out the passenger pigeon in the blink of an eye, all for greed and agricultural progression. The mighty bison stood at a mere few hundred individuals, herds that would have taken days to pass by, gone, just like that. Name any of the big game now abundant in North America, and at that period in history, population recovery seemed almost a lost cause. But despite this, what seemed an impossible task, a small number of people stood prepared to shoulder the future in defiance of an outcome they could not stand and allow to happen. It was great people, hunters, conservationists, naturalists, and visionaries such as Teddy Roosevelt, Aldo Leopold, George Bird Grinnell, who worked tirelessly for the greater good. A future where hunting formed an integral tool to ensure that the wildlife came first. This is such an acknowledgement, and credit today must go to Shane Mahoney, one of our great modern ambassadors, who continuously instills the virtues and importance of a future where the wildlife comes first. But they didn't do it alone. It required collaboration with people and organizations who didn't necessarily see eye to eye. With this, they were able to forge a positive future towards a common end goal. John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt disagreed on many things, but they found a way to come together, and what they achieved was quite incredible. This is something we could learn from today, not just between the hunting community and non-hunting organizations, who we all know here are often critical of us, but also within our community. In a future where hunting survives, we have to unify far more in thinking, in resources, in direction. We must be bolder in what we expect from ourselves. It was these great men who became the forefathers of conservation, and in this also laid down the foundations for an ethic of hunting, which is every bit as relevant today as it was then. We may have failed to keep pace with shifting societal changes, but at the core of what it is to be a hunter, that's never altered. Globally, we have fallen a very long way. What used to be important was the experience and the custodianship of the wildlife and the landscape, where our interest and care extended beyond the species which we pursued, where the idea of honor to yourself, the wildlife, and the environment lay at the very foundation of what it was to be a hunter. As a community, we have allowed the end result to be the sole point of our endeavors. We stopped focusing on the experience and the contributing role we played as hunters. Very often, it became about the inches. And in this, we allowed the concept of trophy hunting to be stolen and morphed into something it wasn't. Writers, editors, filmmakers, gun makers, scope manufacturers, the whole community were to blame. We became happy and content with the notion that what we pursued as hunters was only the moment, a moment of success measured by blood in the sand. We saw this in articles, home and abroad. We saw it in advertisement, and we saw it rampant in the rise of hunting videos, both before and after the wave of online content that today is available everywhere. Ask yourself honestly, what does a kill shot reel say about hunters? Available today online for anybody to watch. The recreational hunter doesn't escape blame either, who, with the liberty of free thought, bought into the over-commercialization of something so beautiful. We prostituted the most important thing we have, the very essence of who we are. Today, we have over-trivialized hunting for the benefit of a social media following, an often shallow veneer for popularity where it's done for the story first. Our ability as individuals to reach so many people could be empowering for our hunting community, but in the same breath, it is incredibly dangerous. What do you think was the biggest recruiting drive for the animal rights organization last year, PETA? It wasn't something they did. It was something we did. Shoot animals, not selfies. That ring a bell? That temporary profile picture. Who thought that was a good idea? Just pause for a moment and reflect on how that looked to someone who didn't hunt. Not a hater, not an anti-hunter, just your average urban-dwelling Joe who knows little of hunting. It looked bad. And I understand how incredibly easy it would be to get carried away with something like that. But it was naive and arrogant, and it encapsulated in a single action just how deep our lack of understanding goes when it comes to how we shape a positive future for hunting. I don't like to dwell on the negatives or the failures of the past, but I do believe we should learn from them. I see chinks of light in the dark clouds which sit firmly over hunting, and a rewriting of the narrative we tell, where once again the journeys take priority and the wildlife comes first. I see a shift in the natures of the articles in our press, in many of the magazines. I see it with new publications like Modern Huntsman, and we see it, and you're going to see one of the films tonight, and David Wright sitting at the front here from Field Sports Channel, the nature of the kind of films we should be making, which educate and explain what we do. The last 2 years have also seen the much newer medium of podcasting, forge a powerful and important voice for the thoughtful hunter. We know from our own show just how this can inform and educate people, and crucially, reach people outside of what we may have traditionally seen as our community. And herein lies one of our great failures. Our ability to recognize the simple fact that in order for hunting to continue to play a role in the management of our landscape, it has to both be relatable and relevant in today's world, in a modern society. This is no easy task, but we first have to acknowledge it. We spend far too much time preaching to the converted. We need people to stand up and drive forward. And sometimes change won't be popular, but the time for such concerns have long passed. We need to push ourselves to a situation where we are proactive and not reactive. Continually we find ourselves on the back foot, defending aspects of hunting which we should have foreseen coming. I believe part of this issue lies in the incredibly short time horizon that we seem to have. Who is sitting down and formulating a strategy for the next 100 years? A strategy to ensure that we pull through the shift in how society views hunting. I hope someone is, because we should be. A longer horizon viewed by people with the right skill set would have foreseen the oversupply of reared game long before it happened, and I know that you all know what I'm talking about. My greatest concern with that is the fact that, well, we've all been so consumed with a problem entirely self-produced and fixable with restraint and the right leadership. We have ignored pressing global precedents which are being set all around us. We are often blinkered inside our own little island, refusing to comment or be counted on international events. In the last 6 months alone, British Columbia has shut down grizzly bear hunting, Poland has laid down crippling restrictions on their own hunting culture, and Tanzania is busy imploding as one concession after the next gets handed back to the government. We need to be more engaged on an international stage. At the very least, it allows us to learn and prepare ourselves better here at home. At best, we contribute, and we help towards a greater challenge of safeguarding hunting and the sustainable harvest of game around the world. What it shows us now is that the science is no longer enough. It's important, obviously, because we have to be right, but it's no longer enough. If it was, many of the confrontations that we see on moorland management every day in the newspapers would disappear. If science was enough, grizzly bears would still be hunted in BC, regulated elephant hunting would be widely accepted, and Cecil the lion would be a name that none of you knew. But it's not. The fact is, in the modern society that we are all part of, the moral reasons that we do what we do matter. This is the reality. It's a reality that we will not change, but we need to understand. There must and there has to be a morally acceptable justification for our actions. Without this, any expectation that we will convince a disinterested, disconnected urban majority, it's destined for failure. It would be very neat for me to conclude some sort of positive outcome for the future of hunting in a single line or some great epiphany that I'd come up with, but I can't. Because, as we all know, it's a complex issue. I do, however, believe that we would be facing a very different proposition if we all expected just a little bit more from ourselves. What many of the great hunters and naturalists had in common was a deep-seated connection with the wilderness. More often than not, this is lost today. We are not honest with ourselves or our motives enough. We fail to appreciate the small things with enough gravity. We are increasingly surrounded by taglines and straplines like huntervationist. I'm sure you've all seen it online, Facebook. Many of us embrace it and proudly. But are we being honest? Ask yourself the question, what do you really do? What makes you, as a hunter, a conservationist? If you're going to say it, you need to own it. If you can't give your time, give your money, but be invested in more than what you can get out of it. What made the great hunter conservationists was love and dedication to the natural world, a desire to understand and learn. We must realize that it is no longer an argument that our actions are sustainable. Why would we be doing something that wasn't sustainable? Our aim should always be enhancement. We must take greater personal responsibility, and our organizations should be brave enough to lay down an ethic which challenges us. Every time you hunt, be that a driven day or stalking on the hill, the expectation should always be that you will take home what you kill. If you share a few hundred birds between a group of friends, you should be prepared to take home every single bird that has fallen. You may be told at the end of that day that that comes at an extra cost. Market prices might be up, demand abundant. Then the choice becomes yours. But the expectation should be that we are responsible for the lives that we take. This has to be the case, and often it's not. We need to rebuild that connection. From here, we must grow, and we have to grow. We must reshape and rewrite the hunting narrative to be relevant today. It can be done, and it will work if the wildlife comes first. Realize that all the people and the agendas who would like to wipe hunting from our future have just as many hours in the day as we do. They don't have time machines. So what does that tell us? It tells us we must be smarter. We must work harder. We must be more dedicated and resolute. It may be politically correct to tell kids of today that it's the taking part that counts. We all know that's a lie. There'll be no taking part medal for the hunting community if we fail to find a foothold in the future, and we must. Our population is climbing from 7 to 8 billion people, and probably will reach 9 in the future. And it will be the value given to wildlife and wild places by hunting which allows us to safeguard the very soul of our planet. It's said that one person can change the world. We don't have one. We have an entire community. If one person can change the world, imagine what we can do together. Let the emotion of what you could lose drive you. Feel it in the pit of your stomach and take ownership of your future and our future. We must find a voice, the voice of the modern hunter, because it is the modern hunter that we must become to survive. This is our time. Thank you.